and if regular people care about reproductive justice, what is happening in Gaza is a gross undermining of Palestinian women's right to reproductive justice. Because it's not just about the right to an abortion. Reproductive justice is the right to have a child if you want one, the right to have health care to take care of your children. Miscarriages were up, I think, 300%. This is an old statistic, too. Everything has gotten so much worse since these statistics came out, and it's just hard to keep track of all the new ones. And sometimes there's no way to even track this information anymore. Women were having C-sections without anesthesia. Women were giving birth with no access to painkillers or hospitals or medicine. People were getting infections. And right before the DNC, I think it was a few days before the DNC, Israel used a precision-guided missile on an apartment building in Gaza where they have like heat sensing technology. They know who is where, when. And it was a mother, her mother, and the woman's two newborn twin children.
Hello, and welcome to the Global Majority for Peace podcast. I'm Ileana Chan, and my co-host is Fiona Edwards. This podcast is brought to you every week where we discuss with special guests from across the world our mission of building a global movement against the US-led war drive against China, Russia, and countries in the global south. Before we get into it with our very special guest today, if you like what you hear, please subscribe to this channel, receive a notification, share, post, all those good things. And if you want to support our work further, you can become a member of Empire Watch on Patreon. All the links are down below in the description. Thank you so much. Your support is vital to building this movement.
We are so excited that joining us today for the Global Majority for Peace podcast is Danaka Katovich. Danaka is the national co-director of CODEPINK, and since 2018, she has been working towards ending US participation in the war in Yemen. At CODEPINK, Danaka oversees all of the organization's advocacy campaigns, and her writing can be found in Jacobin, Salon, Truth Out, Common Dreams, and more. Danaka, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you both for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. So let's just get right into it. Today, the United States is escalating its war drive internationally on several fronts, including the US-Israeli genocidal offensive against the Palestinians, the NATO proxy war in Ukraine against Russia, and the military buildup against China in Asia Pacific. CODEPINK was launched 22 years ago in 2002 to oppose the war in Iraq and the need for a powerful and vibrant anti-war movement, something that is absolutely could not be more important today. Could you tell us about your work with CODEPINK and what CODEPINK is doing today to end US warfare and imperialism? Just a small question.
Yeah, so our mission statement revolves around redirecting war funding to life-affirming programs like healthcare, education, housing, all the things that people need to survive. And I think when you get down to it and you just talk to regular people in the United States, it's a pretty unifying message. I think generally people understand that our priorities are wrong and in the wrong place. And so our theory of change revolves around educating the public and community building. Like our primary goal is education because our public schools don't teach critical thinking. So it's sort of hard to tell people that when people like Kamala Harris say that we're building the most lethal military in the world, what does that mean for the people of this country and what are they sacrificing for that kind of thing? So we focus on education and our campaigns typically revolve around what are the knowledge gaps in the public. So for example, we have a large campaign on China that I think we'll get to later, but I think people just don't know that China's not actually like the enemy of the American people. And we get so much propaganda thrown at us, it's hard to sift through on our own. So we try and create a lot of educational material for folks. And of course, we've been focusing on Gaza, the ongoing genocide, and educating people on that. Honestly, just going back to our roots, like you said, we were founded 22 years ago. And in the lead up to the invasion of particularly Afghanistan, the people who are trying to manufacture consent for war were saying things like, the women of Afghanistan need to be liberated. They couldn't possibly save themselves. All of these things, right? And CODEPINK was like a Western feminist organization being like, actually, war doesn't save women, it kills women. And we saw that after October 7th with the talking points from the Israelis and the US warmongers about sexual violence. And they were trying to use it to justify the ongoing genocide. And that was a whole thing we had to sift through and educate on as well. So, of course, we work on Cuba, we work on ending the blockade. We educate on Venezuela and sanctions. We were working on ending US support for the war in Ukraine. And so we cover a bunch of issues, but our primary goal is educating and community building and doing local outreach where we have chapters so we can get more people into the movement.
That's brilliant. I mean, one of the things we wanted to discuss with you actually is the confusion that I think there is over the extent of US involvement in this genocide in Gaza, which I think there's a real gross underestimation of the role that the United States is playing. We at Global Majority for Peace podcast characterize what is happening as a US-Israeli genocide, because basically without the full support and funding of the United States, Israel wouldn't be in any position to perpetrate the crimes against humanity that it is doing right now on a daily basis. So I was wondering if you could talk us through the extent of the US's political, military, and diplomatic support for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Israel could not do what it's doing without the full diplomatic and military backing of the United States. And it's looked like a couple things. There's, of course, the obvious and hard military support that everyone hears about. So there's the annual $3.8 billion that we give to Israel. And that money is to buy weapons from us, but also from themselves, like from Israeli weapons companies. So that's annual. That's every year. We give them Iron Dome funding every year, and we also send them millions and billions of dollars of weapons. Most of the fighter jets and the bombs that have been flying over and dropping on Gaza have been made in the US by companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and all the big US weapons companies. So we have been sending them bombs. At some point, I think Biden suspended the bigger ones, and now they're sending them again. And when families in Gaza are sifting through the rubble to find their family members, they are picking up shrapnel that says made in the USA. So the people of Gaza are fully aware of who is committing these crimes against them, and it is not just Israel. So there's like the obvious military support. I think I just found out last week actually that the Illinois National Guard and a few other National Guards that are supposed to be directed by the governors and like in response to natural disasters and that kind of thing got deployed to the Middle East, which is crazy. And then there's the diplomatic and political support, which looks like a few different things. And I think one of the most egregious examples is how the US has treated the International Court of Justice's rulings on both the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the settlements in the West Bank. So back in, gosh, I don't know, May or June, when the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, announced that they were issuing arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir, you know, some of the politicians in the US and Congress and Biden made these sort of vague threats to sanction ICJ members. There was going to be a bill in Congress to sanction ICJ members. And it was just a pure act of intimidation against the highest international court that was trying to hold Israel to account for what it's doing. For at that point had killed 30,000 people. And that's a gross underestimation of the death toll. And then more recently, the ICC or ICJ, I'm not sure which one, did say that Israel's an apartheid state, the settlements are illegal, and they need to close down the settlements. And the US was very quick to say that the ICJ should not issue that ruling and that Israel should not be ordered to get rid of the settlements in the West Bank. And right after that happened, Israel started carrying out the largest military operation in the West Bank in years. They've already killed 24 people since then. So it's just this cycle and of the US drawing a fake red line, which was in May, the invasion of Rafah, which obviously was not the real red line. And then they said, as long as they don't do anything in the West Bank, because this war is against Hamas, Hamas isn't in the West Bank, and now Israel's invading the West Bank too. And that isn't even the red line. We are still sending weapons. We are still doing diplomatic cover. We, as I mean the US. And we still have cut aid to UNRWA, the largest institution that carries out the humanitarian aid for Palestinians, not just in the Gaza, but in the West Bank and in Jordan and everywhere in the world where there are displaced Palestinians. So it's looked like a ton of different ways, but I think the thing that people don't understand is that when the US draws this fake red line and says if Israel crosses it, that's when we're doing something about it, and then they go back on their word, I think that's just, it's clear as day that the US isn't just a partner of Israel, it's a complete collaborator in this genocide.
But in August, Code Pink disrupted Governor Tim Walz, who is running as Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate for the Democrats, during the Democratic National Convention's Women's Caucus to declare that Gaza is a feminist issue. Can you speak about why this was important for Code Pink to target, especially as I was trying to reference before that perhaps some people might be under the impression that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are an alternative to Biden. But perhaps can you give us some insights into the impact that the offensive in Gaza has on Palestinian women?
Yeah, that story is interesting because we did not know Tim Walz was going to be there at that event. I mean, we were going with that messaging anyway. It was just kind of good that he was there because I think it was his first time being confronted on the issue and so publicly. But it was at the Women's Caucus event for the Democratic National Convention. So, of course, we were like, we heard it was happening, and we're like, we have to go. We have to bring our messaging there because the Democrats weren't talking about Gaza in any sort of situation. So it just ended up that he was there. And I think he didn't acknowledge us, but he definitely heard us and he definitely needed to hear it. But back in the springtime, I think a statistic came out that 2 mothers in Gaza were being killed every hour. And the Democrats have been holding this issue of reproductive justice over voters' heads in the United States, saying, if you don't vote for us, you're going to lose your right to an abortion. We did already lose our right to an abortion at a federal level. It's not protected by the Supreme Court anymore, and they've done nothing to codify it. So, first of all, there's no truth to that promise either. But if they care about reproductive justice and if regular people care about reproductive justice, what is happening in Gaza is a gross undermining of Palestinian women's right to reproductive justice. Because it's not just about the right to an abortion. Reproductive justice is the right to have a child if you want one, the right to have health care to take care of your children. Miscarriages were up, I think, 300%. This is an old statistic, too. Everything has gotten so much worse since these statistics came out, and it's just hard to keep track of all the new ones. And sometimes there's no way to even track this information anymore. Women were having C-sections without anesthesia. Women were giving birth with no access to painkillers or hospitals or medicine. People were getting infections. And right before the DNC, I think it was a few days before the DNC, Israel used a precision-guided missile on an apartment building in Gaza where they have like heat sensing technology. They know who is where, when. And it was her mother, and the woman's 2 newborn twin children. They were babies. They were born 4 days before they were murdered. Their dad was out getting their birth certificates when they were killed. And if we care about women and reproductive justice, we can't not care about Gaza. Working women in the United States have way more in common with the average Palestinian woman than we do with the American ruling class women. And if the American ruling class is willing to draw the line or willing to not stand up for women's rights in Gaza, they will exclude us at some point as well. So it's about solidarity. It's about, if we really care about women, we have to care about all women. And a huge portion of the casualties so far have been women and children. So if you care about women, you have to care about Gaza. That's just the facts.
Very well and powerfully said there, Danica. And I think this whole issue of the erasure of what is happening to Palestinian women, the attempt to pretend it isn't happening, just, the deaths, the injuries, and all of the sort of everyday hardships that people are enduring that you've just very succinctly gone through. So I think this message of Gaza as a feminist issue is just such a powerful one. And we really need to popularize that, because we can't allow this erasure and this sort of attempt to say, supporting the Palestinians isn't a feminist thing to do. It's the most feminist thing you can be doing right now, is supporting Palestinian women in their call for a ceasefire, for justice and permanent end to the occupation. Which, just sort of moving on to the next facet of this, because Code Pink has recently created a website which is called boughtbyzionism.org, and you explain on the website that the aim is to unmask the machinations of the Zionist lobby, and you kind of describe that as a crucial step towards the liberation of Palestine. And the website identifies 5 different areas: politicians, weapons companies, lobby groups, think tanks, and charities. Can you give us a little overview of what you've exposed? And is there anything that might be surprising to the general public in all of this?
Yeah, the website right now is sort of a work in progress. We're adding stuff to it every single day. We're working on getting all 50 states up, politicians wise, right now. But we hear a lot from people because we have a lot of chapters around the country and we talk to a lot of new people all the time. And we hear this, like, our members of Congress don't actually represent us. And that's true. That's very true. but we also need to talk about why and who they do represent, if anyone. And a lot of these members get into Congress, they spend a few years there, they get added to all these committees like the House Armed Services Committee, for example, or House Committee on Intelligence. And that's when the money starts rolling in for their campaigns from the Zionist groups like AIPAC or weapons companies, for example, like Lockheed Martin, because they want to secure their votes on things like increased Pentagon spending, weapons to Israel, that sort of thing. And so it's just important for people to know how bought out these politicians are. My Senator Tammy Duckworth has took almost $3 million from the Zionist lobby. And there's a direct correlation between how much money she's taken and how less responsive she's gotten to her constituents. And it's like that for a lot of politicians. A lot of politicians take money from the pro-Israel lobby. So it's important for people to know that. It's important for people to know that their politicians are bought off by these industries. And the weapons aspect, the weapons companies and the pro-Israel lobby work together to the same ends almost all of the time. Because if there's a vote to send more weapons to Israel, those weapons are coming from Lockheed Martin. So of course Lockheed Martin has an interest in lobbying for the same bill that AIPAC's lobbying for. These are hugely moneyed interests, and they work together and they collaborate constantly. So that's interesting. And I think, we'll have more information up on it soon. But what I found interesting that other people might as well is because the settlements in the West Bank are internationally acknowledged as completely illegal, the state of Israel can't fund the building of the settlements. Like they can't send money to build houses. So there's charities established in the US that fund the building of settlements in the West Bank. So it's like these charities are directly linked to the colonization of Palestinian land, which is just so evil and egregious. I can't even believe it. So we'll have more information up on that soon, but it has been interesting to learn about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the other thing that it has also exposed, I mean, we've kind of already referenced it, is just how bipartisan this pro-Israel sentiment is in the US. I mean, obviously the elections are coming up in November, and we're looking at a Trump and Kamala Harris race. First of all, what are the stakes for US foreign policy? Are there any differences between these campaigns? Basically, in your opinion, what are we looking at?
I think that honestly, the best I've been thinking is I hope it shakes out that there's a difference somehow. I don't know what it is, but I think people were hopeful once Biden dropped out and Kamala took the reins because they thought, maybe they'd be more sympathetic. Everyone was saying like Kamala's going to be more sympathetic to the Palestinian people. Maybe I'm jaded, but I was like, I don't know why anyone thinks that. That's crazy. Like she has done nothing in the last 11 months to make anyone believe that. So this is her administration too. This is her genocide too. So, but I was like, you know what? Maybe she'll sort of step into her own spotlight and do something different or even say anything different. She hasn't even said anything different. So I don't know where this feigned belief that she's going to be better on this issue is coming from. I genuinely don't. She has not made any promises that are different from Biden's. She said the civilian loss of life is horrible. Biden has said that too. And that's about as far as she's gone on the issue. But even leading up to the DNC, I was like, maybe she'll make a pivot. And I've been hoping this in my heart for months and months and months. When the invasion of Rafah happened, I was like, maybe this is actually it. Maybe this is the turning point. So before the DNC, I was a little hopeful. I don't know. I was like, maybe it'll be different. Maybe everyone's right and I'm just wrong. But I'm having a bad instinct on this. But then Kamala gave that acceptance speech at the DNC. And I think I was talking to Medea Benjamin about it, but she was like, it was creepy. And it was creepy. It was genuinely creepy talking about the most lethal military in the world. I don't want and forget that the Democrats have completely dropped the issue of healthcare in this election. Like they're not even talking about it. They're talking about having the most lethal military in the world. Well, we have so many issues to deal with. But people say Trump will be worse on the Palestine issue, maybe, probably. I don't know. The estimate is that 200,000 people have died. I don't know how it gets worse than that. Almost all of Gaza is completely destroyed. Every hospital is completely destroyed. Every school is completely destroyed. I don't know how you get worse than that when Gaza is already burned to the ground. And then on the other issues of foreign policy, I think after the debate between Biden and Trump, people were saying that Trump is like anti-NATO. I don't think that's true either. He just wants other European countries to pay more into NATO, so that's not true either. So on the foreign policy issue, I don't think the distinction has been made clear to voters. But also a lot of voters don't vote on foreign policy, so that's something else too.
Moving on to the issue of China, CODEPINK has been really active in opposing the US's new Cold War offensive against Beijing, and CODEPINK has got a really great campaign called China is Not Our Enemy, and actually you're organising a community trip to China just after the presidential elections in November this year. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about these initiatives and what you're hoping to achieve with this work.
Yeah, so China's Not Our Enemy was created in response to the rise in anti-China sentiments in recent years and the actions of our government that's taken to accelerate the new Cold War offensive, which includes things like spending billions militarizing the Asia Pacific region, building military bases in the area, utilizing military and economic coercion to push US interests in the area, and then like actually just calling China an enemy and demonizing anything China does, which led to not only rising tensions between us and China, but a rise in Asian American hate across the country. So, our campaign for China's Not Our Enemy seeks to do two things: educating the public on how consent is being manufactured to go to war with China, and also dismantling the propaganda by teaching our audience about China, dismantling the lies told by the media and our politicians, and talking about the billions of tax dollars just being sent needlessly to prepare for war with China, a war that nobody wants. And then the second thing our campaign does is try to redirect all that energy into a push for peace and cooperation, which is why we emphasize friendship with China and these citizens' delegations. So, we're in a multipolar world. We want mutual cooperation. The people want mutual cooperation. So we think the China trip accomplishes both of the goals of educating and building solidarity, because the trip will educate and inform people on China, because there's no better way to do that than like going yourself, and raise people up to the dialogue. So we can't trust our government to seek peace and cooperation with China. We have to do that people to people. So I think it'll be a good trip, but the team's quite excited about it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I wish I could join you guys. You know, Code Pink is a campaign that I've deeply admired for a while now. I've been following a lot of your initiatives, your direct action stuff, the education. You have a radio, you have a YouTube. I mean, your social media is killing it. It's just a really impressive campaign. And like we said in the very beginning, it's needed more than ever. Anti-war voices, anti-imperial voices. You know, we're facing, feels like an escalation towards World War III, right? So, what do you think that we need to do? I mean, we're looking at the US and the UK. Our governments are all just gung ho for war. So, what do we do to help with this anti war movement? In your view, what are the most effective things?
Yeah, I think we've reached the point where like the most effective things are the hardest things to do. We're not going to get instant gratification. The people, like regular people, are on our side. In the US, a majority of people support a ceasefire. A majority of people now support and stop, like, not sending any more weapons to Israel. So the people are generally on our side. But if anyone takes a second to think about their own arc of political involvement, sometimes it takes years to go from just being pissed off and having an opinion to actually doing something about it. We do have lives, and the scarcity mindset is there. Capitalism keeps us on our toes, and we have a lot of other things to worry about. And it's hard to take that step into getting involved in this kind of work and activism. But I think one thing our chapters strive to do is they are constantly out talking to people and talking to their neighbors, going to farmers markets and talking to new people and meeting new people and getting them to join the movement. It is hard work. I used to get nervous like disrupting events with the Code Pink. I think I was the first person to disrupt Joe Biden during the genocide period. But going door to door talking about these issues is way harder than yelling at the president, in my opinion. You have to be methodical, you have to be approachable, you have to be willing to get out of your comfort zone in like a place where we're so socially isolated and stratified. Bringing people together is hard. And that's like the necessary everyday work we need to be doing. If I'm not talking to someone new every day about this issue in a coffee shop, just casually like meeting people, then I think I'm failing. And it's just a matter of bringing more people in and being accessible and not making people feel like they're stupid for not knowing. Like, of course they don't know. They're inundated with propaganda every day. So I think that's the hardest thing to do, but it's at this point the absolutely most necessary thing that we could be doing. Like, we are nothing without the people, and we're nothing without the masses, and we will never win without them. Never. So that's the work everyone needs to be doing all the time. Like, if you're not talking to strangers, we're not doing the right work, I think. So I think that's where we're at. And of course, we're also in Congress every day calling people out for what they do, and we'll continue to do that. But, even more effective is these members of Congress aren't just getting confronted in the halls of Congress, but also when they go back home, when they're going to their like neighborhood block parties to talk to voters and stuff. They should be getting confronted there too. So that's the hard work. And I think just having faith that the people are on our side, it's just a matter of going to talk to them, I think is something that I try and hold on to when we're doing this work.
Talked quite a lot about Code Pink's mission being education and how important that is. And I think your last answer really spoke to that as well. Like, we have to win people over to the fact that this war drive is just not in our interest. It's not in the interest of humanity, but it's not in the interest of any citizens in the countries that are being aggressive, like the United States, Britain, other European countries. So one thing that we do ask all our guests is, what would you recommend for people to read or to watch to understand more about what's going on in the world today? Like, what recommendations would you have to inform and inspire the anti-war movement?
Code Pink, we try and post some, educational stuff every day. I feel like we're covering a lot of stuff. On Labor Day, we did a post about like how the labor movement stood with Palestine and that sort of thing. So of course, Code Pink. Breakthrough News also does a lot of really awesome coverage. And if it's like not just educating yourself, but also reaching out to family members who you might think are sympathetic but haven't like completely come around on the issue yet. Like Democracy Now, I think is really accessible and relatable for people. And, I think people are receptive to that kind of coverage too. So Democracy Now is great. Code Pink also has a Medium and Substack that we publish like other authors, not just Code Pink people, that I think is useful and has a variety of different writing styles that I think people like and are receptive to. So yeah, Breakthrough, Code Pink, Democracy Now. I think it's just a matter of finding something that's accessible that you can share around too. So Code Pink does like infographics and that sort of thing. Also, IMEU does awesome work as well.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on our show. We really appreciate it. Do you have any concluding remarks? Do you have any last little things that you want to say?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And if you're in the movement, you're listening to this, go talk to strangers and go do the real work. Get out of the echo chamber. Go meet people. Go talk to people. Please, we need it.
Oh my God, I love that advice. And it also scares me because I'm a little bit of an introvert. So I will endeavor to try that. Like, I will endeavor to try that. I think I can.
It's like working a muscle. It's like working out. The more I do it, the more comfortable I feel doing it because I'm also kind of anxious and nervous all the time. So it's just a matter of doing it as much as you can and working it out every day.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll report back if I did do it.
Thanks so much, Danica, for joining us. And yeah, we've got our work cut out basically. And it's been really fantastic to have this conversation with you and just to hear about all the great work that you're doing over there in the United States. Really important, in the belly of the beast, as they say. So if you've enjoyed this show, please do like, do subscribe, pass it on to your friends, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, pass it on to your friends. Danica says so. Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye.